This is the High Pass Podcast. I'm Dereck Blackburn, your host, and this week we have Emma Newton, multi-instrumentalist and audio engineer at Big Night Studios in Lincoln, Rhode Island. Emma, how are things going today?
Things are going pretty well. I mean, I'm sitting here surrounded by my harp and my piano and my favorite musical toys.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking at you right now, and your harp is beautiful.
I know. His name is Mr. Pluck. He's one of my dearest friends. There he is.
I mean, it's really a sight to behold. How did this instrument come into your life?
When I was little, I was a big fairies kid. I was obsessed with anything that was magical and flying and glittery and flowery, and got it in my mind that I had to learn how to play the harp. And then when I heard harp in the Zelda soundtrack for the fairy fountain of healing, I was like,
oh yeah,
this is my future. I need to know how to play this instrument so I can play the Fairy Fountain Healing song.
That's really cool. So where was this harp made?
Italy. I believe it's an Italian harp by this brand called Salvi. It's truly such a beautiful instrument. Thank you to my parents so much for actually indulging my whims and being like, okay, they really can't stop talking about harp. Maybe they'll get a lesson.
That's really great. I know that this instrument features prominently on your self-released EP, The Mild West, that you released under the name Space Cowboy Newt. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with this instrument and how that all came about?
Yeah, so I have been training as a classical musician since age 4. I started on piano, and then I started harp, I believe, when I was 9, maybe 10. And it was all classical training the whole time, but I loved writing songs from early on. Piano and harp became pretty crucial components of my songwriting, and still are definitely. So after growing musically many years, going to Berkeley for a bit, getting exposed to new genres, I've been incorporating harp into kind of like bedroom pop and now somewhat neo-soul kind of sounds. And the Mild West EP leans a lot more on like the synthy dream pop kind of stuff. I think harp lends itself really well to being in a cloud of synthesizer pads and sparkly sounds.
It absolutely does. I mean, I've told you this before, but I'm a huge fan of your music, and I think that I found out about you through a friend who shared your music on Instagram. I was just blown away by just like the arrangements and all the sounds that you were coming up with. And I remember specifically hearing the harp and feeling like, I don't know, I've heard so many harp sounds. Like, is that a real harp? Like, is this somebody who is like actually playing a real harp and integrating it into all of these like really great, like bedroom pop sounds? But now that I know a bit more about you, I'm wondering, how did you make the transition from like music production to audio engineering?
I remember when I was in my my heavy singer-songwriter phase in high school, I went to a local recording studio for a session and was blown away at all of the buttons and the knobs and the wires and the microphones, and thought it was so cool and had this vision in my head of this sound that I was going for, but I had no words to describe it. And I wanted so badly to understand all of that gear and all of the science behind how to get the exact sound from my head out into the world. So that's really what like prompted that interest, was that session where I knew if I just knew the names and the tools that I could make something really cool happen.
Do you remember any of the first tools that you used to create music, whether to like record or just, to make music, maybe like when you were like in your teens?
Well, first I would take the Finale music scoring software and make, arrangements of my music on that and suffer through the sound of a MIDI voice singing back, not lyrics, but just some sounds. But that was some very primitive production. And then my dad bought me some software called Magic's Music Maker, and it absolutely crashed my family's little Dell laptop every time I added more than like 3 instruments. But I started producing songs on that, and it was, I think I had one SM58. Yeah, even with the jankiest little tools, it was so fun.
And was there like a turning point from there to the next level?
When I was showing interest in music production at high school, my parents found this summer program at UMass Amherst that was like a music production using Logic crash course. And I fell in love with using Logic. It is like, I feel like I know how to play Logic like an instrument at this point. Like it's so fun for me.
That's so funny that you mentioned Finale. I'm sort of familiar with it. I used it a long time ago, but the jump from Finale to Logic is pretty big. Is Logic your preferred DAW?
I would say it's a 50-50 with Logic and Pro Tools. I do Pro Tools for tracking almost exclusively, and I love it for mixing as well. But producing and arranging instruments, I really only use Logic for that.
I feel very similarly about Ableton Live. I love tracking and making music in Ableton, but if I'm doing like serious tracking or serious mixing, I will usually move over to Pro Tools. I just really dislike the way that Pro Tools treats MIDI, and it's just always been easier to like whip up an arrangement in Logic or Ableton for me. So tell me a little bit about what your experience is like now. Are you working at a studio now, or what is your status as a freelancer?
So right now I work pretty frequently at Big Night Studio here on my shirt. And that's in Lincoln, Rhode Island, and it's this beautiful studio located in an 1800s textile mill that had been renovated. And it's right on a river. The rooms are huge. It's big, it's nice. And it's just really feels like a creative haven. So I've been working there since February of 2022, and I feel like I found my home in engineering. Like I found my place, I found my people, I found my calling. I love it. So I've been doing lots of tracking work there, mixing work, and I work with people from like all ages, all genres, all identities. It's just such like a wonderful like melting pot of musicians that comes to the studio.
That's so great. I'm really happy for you. Have you had anybody along the way that has kind of like inspired or motivated you in audio engineering?
I mean, besides Dereck Blackburn?
Come on now. I appreciate that.
He's hiding. So one person who I feel very fondly about in this industry is my dear friend Siobhan. Her stage name is Sayo, and she's the first person I ever produced music for. And we write together, we produce together, and we've been going on this journey of musical growth since I believe when we graduated high school in 2017. And we've tried out so many genres, so many types of recording, like different locations, different methods, and that's something that really inspired me to pursue this work, because working with an artist who I care about and helping their songs like reach their full potential audio-wise was so fun, and she was so encouraging, and it was so nice.
Are there any unique challenges or anything like that that you've faced along the way that you could talk about?
Unique challenges. Well, I think an important thing to take into account when you're recording someone is that they're almost never as comfortable in the studio as you are. It can be a very vulnerable space for people if they're coming in, whether it's like their song content and if they have some emotions they really need to express but feel self-judgmental about, or if they're worried about their performance and if they're going to sound flat, or if there's just so much nervous excitement, but sometimes just nerves coming into the studio with people. And engineers and producers have to be really sensitive about that and really make sure that the space is a safe space for people. So I started recording professionally at a small studio in Franklin, Mass. Called Encore Music Academy and Recording Studios. And my clientele was the students. There would be groups or solo singers that would come into the studio to record vocals. And especially with the soloists, it was really daunting to be put in a small box and being told to sing and not really seeing people's faces and just hearing on a talkback like, okay, let's do it again. And I think that it's so important, and especially with young musicians, to really show them that it's okay to be themselves in the studio and to show in their performance who they are, what they're trying to say. And having that experience with young students, I think really helps in people of all ages that come to the studio. And that can be as simple as like, if someone's feeling a little self-conscious in the booth, turning off the lights and projecting a calming video of like a crackling fireplace to make them feel like physically in a commerce space, or it can be talking about what makes them nervous and why they're having such strong fear about the material they're singing. And some people like to talk it out. And then some people do well with character coaching, where in order to get people to open up and sing with artistry and with storytelling, you coach them to say, oh, imagine you're singing to XYZ. Imagine you are in this setting. And that can really help people get out of their heads and into a character, which ends up feeling less scary.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's something that a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around, that they could have an experience like that in a recording studio. I think a lot of times people think of these experiences as transactional in nature, like they give you money, you set up your microphones, they set up their instruments, and they play and you record, and then it becomes something after the fact, right? But really what it could be is like a chance to kind of get out of your everyday mode of creation and into a space that is like purpose built for this sort of role playing.
We are at Big Nice, we're very big on vibes. Vibes are extremely important. If you're going into a creative space, you want it to feel creative, cozy, and comfortable. I mean, who's going to argue that? So yes, we have a projector projecting onto a bass trap on the wall. And we just put on like ambient calming things, usually like live cams of like a subway in Kyoto or something, or live cam sheep walking around a field. Because it's really nice to be able to, especially with like the sheep one or something, look over when you're feeling stressed and be like, oh, music is nothing more than being surrounded by sheep and making a little song. I feel better now.
I love it. I really do. I think you all have really hit the nail on the head with this, because it's really important in a lot of situations in the studio to be able to divert your understanding of where you are in order to kind of like connect to a higher plane.
Exactly. Studio television is such a crazy thing when that happens, especially if you're working on a song all day and you're racing through the tracking and you're like, okay, we need this instrument, we need this. And then by the end of the day, you're like, do I even like this? So it's good to have little distractions that give you a moment of resetting, breathing, and getting back to an accurate representation of how you're hearing the music.
I hope this next question I'm going to ask you makes any sense at all. How do you balance the technical aspects of audio engineering with the artistic aspects of music production?
So for me, I think both the technical and musical sides are intertwined mostly when I'm working. And while audio engineering isolated from music production is a very technical thing, how can you not be taking into account musicality and creativity when you're setting up a mic for a piano? How can you not take production into account when you're setting up a kick drum and you want it to be a nice, deep, clubby thump? Like, I feel like production and engineering are so similar in that you're using science and creativity to get the best musical result. Though I definitely, on sessions where I'm not explicitly being asked to produce, I keep quiet on like musical ideas, and I kind of just let people go with what their visions are, and I don't try to impose any of my musical vision on people. But I still think that tech stuff, mic choices, mic placement, the room you're in has to do so much with music as well.
Yeah. I think about that a lot with like guitar-based bands that I record, where they'll give me a reference and it's like, okay, I can hear this band, they're recording, they're using Vox amps or they're using Marshall amps, or I can tell that there's a 57 and a 121 being used or something like that. And it reminds me of this lesson that I learned like really early on, which is some people are really, really good at capturing sound, but there are some that are really good at putting you as the listener in a space. And like you, I try to do my best to balance those two. So I really relate to your answer. So if people want to work with you, Emma, where can they find you?
Well, you can go to bignicestudio.com and use their booking form and mention that you want to work with me. That's one option. But you can also message me on any of my socials. On Instagram, I am under Space Cowboy Newt, which is my stage name, and you can feel free to DM me there. You can use the contact form on my website, which is emmanewtonmusic.com. Yeah, those are the ways.
So before we finish, are there any special projects or anything like that you're working on or looking forward to?
So one project that I really am happy to get a chance to highlight is what I'm calling the Protest Song Project. So after the overturning of Roe v. Wade last June, I and so many other people were very disheartened about what that meant for people who can get pregnant in this country, and just set up such a dangerous onslaught of other legal cases that could cause mayhem. And after being so angry about so many things going on with social justice, with the environment, with everything, I felt like I had to do something. But I am notoriously very bad at writing political protest songs. So I wanted to put my engineering skills to use in order to protest. So what I've been doing is anyone who has a song about Roe v. Wade or women and gender expansive people's reproductive rights, I will produce, engineer, mix, and master your song for free. Honestly, as I started to work on some of these projects, I wanted to expand it a little further. So I'm now accepting applications for not just Roe v. Wade songs, but women's rights, queer rights, racial justice, environmental justice, all kinds of stuff like that. And that is the Protest Song Project.
So where can people find the application for the Protest Song Project?
So there's an application form on my website, emmanewtonmusic.com, and there applicants can describe a little bit about what their song is about, what's the message they want to come across, what are they protesting. You can upload lyrics, you can upload a demo.
I think that's a really great idea, a really great project. I think it's an excellent way to bring people into the studio environment that would usually feel like it's inaccessible to them. So I definitely applaud your effort there. It's not a small thing. It is a big step. And I just think it's great that you have put yourself forward and to provide this to the community. And with that, I want to express my gratitude to you for being on the show today and sharing with us your experience and your stories about your journey, and hope to hear more from you in the future.
Thank you very much, Dereck.